All right, everyone, we start off today talking about, of course, the war between Israel and Palestine. It's really no longer a war between Israel and Hamas, per se, nor is it like Hamas's war against the Israeli government or the IDF. It basically is targeting mainly civilians at this point, and this is happening, unfortunately, on both sides of the border, so people continue to die, and it's not like the rocket attacks have stopped. There's been sporadic fighting on the northern border, too. Hezbollah has gotten partially involved, although they haven't fully committed, like they haven't mobilized 50,000 people or anything like that. But given the warning that was issued by Iran the other day, plus Hezbollah's actions, this really does threaten to become a regional war. So no longer Palestine invaded part of Israel near Gaza and killed 1,000 people, and the IDF retaliated by bombing half of Gaza City to ruins, but really the whole region erupting. And we'll see what players take what sides, who gets involved and who doesn't, but I speculate at this point there's a pretty measurable chance that it spirals out of control, unfortunately. Gaza, though, has effectively collapsed at this point. It appears to no longer be functionally, there's no form of governance there really, other than Hamas controls swaths of it and is digging in, awaiting larger scale Israeli invasion, which appears imminent. It appears that Israel is going to go all in into northern Gaza. This is why they've warned people to evacuate, although there are a number of problems with that. You've got no food, no water, no electricity. You know, another reason not to own an electric car, just so that you're aware, if you're in any sort of smaller subjugate state, part of somebody else's sphere, having an electric car is a bad idea. Having a few extra jerry cans with gas in them lying around is probably more conducive to you surviving. Just putting that out there as a mild statement on the side. You've got at least half of the Gazan population displaced. Technically, at this point, more than that, because the northern half with Gaza City, etc., has a high population density. Those people have been forced to move. Not everyone can, of course. You know, you're bedridden in the hospital. You're pretty much at the mercy of your neighbors to, cart you out on the back of a pickup truck and hope that there's no roadside bombs in the way by Hamas or any airstrikes by Israel mistaking it for a Hamas vehicle. Otherwise, you end up vaporized. You've got at least half the population displaced, and a much higher concentration now in the south where people are being told to go. Hamas is effectively preventing people from leaving when they can because they want to use them as human shields. They've done this for quite some time. They're setting up in hospitals and schools and so forth, and Israel's bombing them, which means even if you had a cessation of hostilities literally now, like as of today, Netanyahu and Herzog come out and say, you know what, enough is enough, okay, we've made our point, and Hamas says, oh, thank you, and then they go back to doing seemingly calm diplomacy, which is basically what passes for calm in that region of the world. You would have a number of destroyed hospitals and schools and thousands of destroyed civilian structures. Numerous businesses are gone. You have massive damage to infrastructure, and this is in a fairly short period of time. Israel does have a huge amount of firepower. By the way, so too does Syria, and they could get involved as well, and then all hell breaks loose. And so even if you had a complete cessation of hostilities, it'd be many, many moons before Gaza would even resemble civilization. I mean, even in the best of times, when you go a protracted period without any significant fighting, it's still a very impoverished, highly dense populated area with limited resources available for civilians because a lot of the aid that goes there gets siphoned off by Hamas anyway. And this has been a problem too. And is totally dysfunctional. That's under good circumstances. By the definition of the Gazan region, that's good compared to the alternative. You have thousands and thousands and thousands of people killed now on both sides, and who knows how many friggin' injured. And when you don't have power and water in the hospitals and you get a bunch of injured people, most of which are, by the way, not militants at all, there's a reason why aid workers currently are sounding the alarm. It didn't help Herzog's comments the other day that collective punishment was very much on the table. Now, this was quickly countermanded by the official Israeli press and by the Knesset. But when the president of your country is saying, well, Palestinian civilians, they're not blameless either, so, Basically, if there's some collateral damage there, it's perfectly fine. Yeah, that's a little bit over the top, even by the standards of that region. Generally, you're killing civilians, but you don't, insinuate that it's good. You say, well, it's unfortunate that we had to kill all those Palestinians, but, Hamas was operating in the building. Sorry about that. Oh, we're sorry we killed a bunch of Jewish civilians, although Hamas rarely apologizes for that, I would note. There's a little bit of a difference in messaging sometimes. We were going after the IDF target, and the rockets went the wrong way or something like that. God, North Korea shows more restraint. So, Gaza doesn't exist, basically. It's no longer even really an entity. Israel is certainly not even keeping up the pretense that there's a real territorial border there other than the wall that they themselves control, covered in auto turrets and shit like that. There's an enormous amount of firepower drawn up ready to march into northern Gaza. And it looks like the goal is basically to level the place. Hamas will be entrenched with tens of thousands of fighters. Israel will take, by the way, fairly heavy casualties in the area. One thing that people need to understand: land incursions of any size into Gaza are different than what we've seen for the past decades generally in this region. And this is another reason to fear maybe that there's a regional war in the area. Again, I'm not Team Israel or Team Palestine, and I certainly don't believe that third parties should get involved, including regional parties. But it's possibly inevitable. The IDF is used to running mainly airstrikes in the region, hitting Gaza from the air, hitting coastal or aquatic targets with their navy, in which they have absolute superiority over Hamas. Hamas does not really, Hamas's air force is paragliders, apparently. They're used to doing that. The risk of sending a jet fighter over Palestine into an area where anti-air weapons, at least, are going to be difficult to obtain. Rockets, plenty of those. Small arms, plenty of those. Anti-tank munitions, the Hamas has some of them as well. The IDF's tanks are not invulnerable to onslaught there, and certainly not to the kind of traps that Hamas, of necessity, is going to be setting up near the area they expect to have an incursion in. So you're going to have a lot of IEDs, roadside bombs, and shit like that as well. But normally the IDF conducts air missions. There's a Hamas target. They're firing rockets from that courtyard, so we bomb the courtyard. They've holed up with a couple of hostages in this medical ward, so we bombed the medical ward. The risk is relatively low considering what you can accomplish with mass air superiority. Once tanks start moving into the region, it's a little bit more difficult. When the land incursion happens and troops and tanks and carriers and trucks and so forth are roving around half of Gaza, harder to conduct an airstrike now, isn't it? Because of how small the area is and how densely populated it is, you might hit your own men. I don't even know exactly what they're trying to do. It would almost be better to leaflet northern Gaza, say, look, we're basically going to destroy Gaza City. We're not going to pretend anymore that we're not desiring to do so. Honestly, for humanitarian and even diplomatic and strategic purposes, it almost makes more sense for Israel to demand that Egypt open its border. Egypt, so far they're saying, no, there won't be any refugees. We're willing to send aid. The Israelis won't let us. We're not willing to take Palestinians coming in the other direction. And there are tribal and religious reasons for that as well. There's a reason why the Palestinians aren't allowed to go to any of those neighboring countries. Ultimately, I don't know that there's really any solution to this other than mass regional war, or at some point, the killing just gets so much the international community says knock it off, and then you go back to that long-term seeming calm. So Gaza, effectively, there is no Gaza right now. I'd be shitting my pants if I were an aid worker stuck in Gaza City. It's like, okay, I'm probably going to die. I'm certainly going to run out of supplies pretty quickly. Hamas probably stole them all already anyway. So I don't even know what the fuck I'm doing here. So might as well pray, because it's probably the only thing you can do at the moment. That's about all. Peace out.